Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the updates from fall camp. There are a ton of things going on, including some injuries, which we obviously hate to see, but you got to make sure you have some second and third line guys that are ready to roll, and frankly, that's what we're going to talk about right about now. There are some players that just have to make the most of the next couple of weeks as fall camp continues, and they're going to have to make big time plays for their team as they head into this season. So let's get into these players real quick, and I'll start over in Tennessee. We talked about some of the injuries that they're facing. One, to Jordan Thomas, the very talented nickelback. It sounds like it's going to be Boo Carter in his place. This is a freshman that's incredibly athletic. A very, very talented kid. Is likely already going to be a factor in the return game because he's just special with the ball in his hands, but this kid needs to step up huge in this back end. Whether it's, taking him out of the return game to make sure he can focus on that more or what have you, I don't know. But at the end of the day, they have to make sure they have an elite nickel, because if they don't, this entire back end is going to look just not as good as it possibly could. I think they have a ton of really talented players out back there, but when you have a freshman kind of filling into a really, really important role on that back end, it definitely gives you a little bit of worry. Now, he has plenty of talent. There's no two ways about that, but you have to come a pretty long way over the next couple of weeks, and it might be as big of a couple of weeks for him as really anyone in the entire SEC. So definitely someone to watch. He's going to have an effect one way or the other. Let's hope it's a good effect for all the Vol fans out there. But I want to get into Cameron Seldon as well here. He is slated as the backup running back right now for the Vols, and it's because Dylan Sampson is kind of dealing with an injury, working his way back. Doesn't sound like it's going to be too big of an issue, but overall, you got to make sure you have another running back. When you talk about all of the elite offenses around the country, they have that change of pace back. Last year, it was Jaden Blue for Texas. It was, it's going to be someone like Roderick Robinson for Georgia this upcoming year, or Branson Robinson. So you have to have that second guy. You have to, whether it's a bruiser or someone that just has outright speed, you have to make sure you have that change of pace back, that third down guy that you can get the ball to and make sure he gets those couple of yards. Now, Dylan Sampson is going to be the story of this offense in the run game, but when you have someone right behind him that you feel confident in, like Cameron Seldon, you'll feel really great about your offense going forward, especially with some of the injury troubles that Sampson is dealing with. But let's move on to Oklahoma, and let's talk about a USC transfer that they got. A little payback on Lincoln Riley there, but they added a huge piece to that offensive line at the left tackle position. Michael Tarquin is a very, very talented player, a very important player for this Oklahoma Sooner team. When you talk about this team, the O-line is where we all point, right? The O-line is the one that makes us all a little bit nervous. It sounds like they feel pretty good about both their tackle positions right now. Don't feel quite as good about their guard positions, but it definitely will be a huge thing if they can nail down this left tackle position, because overall, when we talk about college football, we talk about football in general, we put quarterback 1, we put left tackle 2. There's a reason for that. It's because quarterback is so important. So when you talk about a guy like Michael Tarquin, he's coming into a team that needs him. There's no two ways about that. They need him to play pretty much lights out from the get-go, and if they don't, it's going to be a relatively disappointing season for Jackson Arnold. But if you can protect this guy, the talent is off the charts for this kid, so cannot wait to see what he can do as long as Michael Tarquin can have a good couple of weeks heading into a very good season. And then Jaden Jackson is the other guy I want to talk about, a freshman defensive tackle. He's going to be called on early and often this year. There's no two ways about that. Him and David Stone, frankly, I think are going to play big-time snaps. I do like the front line they have with Dominic Williams and DeJoun Terry, but we've talked about how you need about 4 or 5 guys at that defensive tackle position, particularly in the SEC, to be able to compete the way that they want. So someone like Jaden Jackson, although he is a freshman, is going to have to walk in there, have a big-time camp, roll into the season, and feel really confident in his abilities, because they're definitely going to need him. They're going to need at least a couple other guys on that defensive front to step up, and from where I'm sitting at least, I think Jaden Jackson probably has the best chance to do that this upcoming year. LSU I want to talk about here for a second. I want to talk about Sage Ryan first, because the back end was just a mess a year ago, and Sage Ryan was a big piece of that. Let's just be totally honest. He has moved from safety to cornerback, and frankly, I think that's probably the better place for him, but regardless, he needs to take a big-time step forward. When you talk about this LSU back end, I don't think the talent level is the issue. When you have guys like Major Burns, Ashton Stamps, Sage Ryan, Javian Toviano, there's plenty of guys out there. There's guys to make plays. You need to make sure that the guy at the head of the snake, the leader of this team, the leader of that back end in particular, Sage Ryan, is as ready as you can possibly be. He needs to be the leader of that back end, and frankly, I think they can line up a pretty good group if they have him come along the way that they're hoping. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Obviously, that's only a piece of the puzzle, but I think it'd be a rather big one for LSU to get in place. I also want to talk about JVR Suggs, a very, very talented defensive lineman that LSU brought into the portal, or brought in from the portal in spring ball over from Grand Valley State. A very, very talented kid. Frankly, as I look at this team right now, the only defensive tackle that I really like is Jacoby and Guillory, and I think LSU fans would probably agree with me on that one. I do think this is a very talented kid and someone that could definitely step up into that other role next to Guillory, so definitely someone to watch. Jalen Lee is also another guy to watch around that, but they brought this guy in for a reason. They didn't get a ton out of the portal by any means. This is someone that needs to hit out of that portal position, and although he went to Grand Valley State and he's making that big time step up, this is a very talented physical player that absolutely could have a big effect on the season for the Tigers. But let's go over to Nebraska and let's talk about the guy that is filling in for Teddy Prohaka over at that left tackle position. It sounds like it is going to be Turner Corcoran, a very talented player, but he's getting the call from the bullpen for a reason. Definitely going to be a huge step up for him in terms of what he's asked to do, because left tackle is a whole different conversation than where he is right now, I believe, as the backup for the right tackle. So not necessarily the same game by any means. Definitely will be a huge thing. Protection is important for every team. I think we all understand that. When you can keep your quarterback upright, you're doing a lot of things right. But for Nebraska, it's outright mandatory this year. They cannot have Dylan Raiola be the guy that they want him to be while still being under pressure every second of every day. No freshman quarterback can handle that the way that they want him to. So right now, they need a solid left tackle. It is Turner Corcoran, and the next couple of weeks are going to be huge for this offensive line to take shape and make sure that their freshman quarterback goes in with as much confidence as you can possibly imagine. And that brings me to this guy. Dylan Raiola obviously has a huge couple of weeks ahead of him. When you talk about where they start the season, obviously week one's not too much of a worry, but week two, when you play Colorado at home, he's going to have to execute, and there's going to be so much talk around that game, so much pageantry, so much circumstance around that game that it's going to be a lot. It's going to get his head swimming just a little bit. If he can handle that and keep moving, you have to feel incredibly confident as a Nebraska fan. And frankly, I think they're expecting to win that game. So it'll be interesting to watch this kind of unfold. He's got to feel very, very confident right now because he's doing everything that they want him to do. So he's walking into the season as of right now really, really confident. Obviously, those big-time scrimmages that are coming up over the next couple of weeks will dictate that a ton. But this sounds like a kid that is going in with a ton of confidence, and they very much need that for Nebraska to succeed this upcoming year. Over to Oklahoma State here, Lyric Rawls is a very talented corner, or nickelback, that they're definitely going to need to rely on a little bit. They're a little thinner on the back end than everywhere else, although they're not really thin anywhere, if I'm being totally honest. So this was one of those things that was a little bit hard to decide because they have so many dudes that you could say any of them are important, or you could say they have too many dudes to where none of them really have to have a huge next couple of weeks and they'll be more than fine. But I think this guy is one that can totally open up things. I think this back end is really talented for the most part. I just think they need that guy to kind of bring everything together, maybe be that big time playmaker that has 4 or 5 picks this upcoming year. So this could be that guy. This could be the guy that kind of sets the tone for this defense and does a ton of really good work on that back end. And I think it starts with a couple of really big weeks here. And then we have Obi Ezigbo. I want to talk about him, a transfer from Gannon University. You likely do not recognize those jerseys, and that's for good reason. It's definitely a very, very small school that he is coming from, but still a very talented pass rusher. No two ways about it. A very, very talented kid that can make so many different plays for this team, and they're going to need it. They have a ton of different, things checked on that box, but I think pass rush is one of the areas that I'm just a little bit worried about for this team, and if Ezigbo can come along the way that they're hoping, they'll be more than fine in that position. So overall, I think you look at this Oklahoma State team, there's very few questions, which means there's not necessarily specific guys that really need to step up more than others, but if an injury does pop up, obviously that next guy in line will have to step up in huge ways. But as I look at it, I think this back end and this pass rush might be a little bit of worry going into this season for Oklahoma State, but these two guys could make that so much easier as they go into this season. And then we'll go over to NC State, and we'll start with an Ohio State transfer that came over. Jahad Carter is a very, very talented player, someone that they very much needed in the portal, and was one of my favorite late pickups in the portal at that nickelback position because they need someone to elevate that back end for NC State. You look at this team and you love the offense. There's so many weapons on that offensive side of the ball. You look at the defense and losing a guy like Peyton Wilson and having a back end that looks pretty good on paper, but isn't necessarily as, as experienced, as known as some of the other pieces on this team are. So overall, you don't want to get into a bunch of shootouts. You have to make sure your back end and your defense overall is in a really good spot going into this year. And I think this is going to be a huge player for them. He's going to be the kind of glue guy that puts it all together. And if he can be a really consistent player on this back end, they absolutely can be a really dangerous team in the ACC. And then you talk about the other big time void that needs to be filled. It's Sean Brown filling in for Peyton Wilson, and this one is a very, very interesting one because the reality is he was a free safety a year ago. He is moving down into a linebacker position where he's going to be asked to do a ton. Now he has the athleticism to break down in coverage to make all the plays that you need him to make in that respect. Rushing the passer might be a little bit of a trouble, but they seem to be very confident in this kid. If he can hit the way that they want him to, he's definitely going to be a huge player for them. When you have a guy like Peyton Wilson walk out of the program, you need someone to step up big, and this is going to be the guy playing in his spot, so he's going to have to step up big, even moving down from that safety position into the linebacker position. I think Sean Brown's about as important a player you could find on that Wolfpack roster, but it's obviously going to be a crazy conversation. There's so many different players that have to make big-time plays, and frankly, there's likely going to be a couple injuries that come out today and tomorrow that define a lot of the players that need to step up huge, but when you look at some of the injuries that have already happened, Book Harder stepping in for Jordan Thomas over at Tennessee is going to be huge. When you talk about Turner Corcoran stepping in for Teddy Perhaka at Nebraska at the left tackle, that's going to be massive for this team's success. So there's going to be a ton of other things that kind of come out over the next couple of weeks that are going to define the next couple of weeks for a couple of specific players. There will definitely be some guys that will kind of be added to this list, and we'll talk about them as we go on, but definitely a couple of players there that I just think really need to hit for that team, for those teams to have the success that they want to this upcoming year, because all the teams I just named can absolutely win their conference and go to the playoff if a couple of things go their way, including those players finding their groove. But obviously going to be an interesting thing to talk about over the next couple of days. We will continue getting into this tomorrow, likely finish it out tomorrow if I had to imagine, but let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a recruiting update, break down how Auburn is about to probably hit big at the quarterback market, and Texas A&M got huge commitments yesterday. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.